Last month, the BBC's News at 6 ran a story on the newborn son of Sir Elton John and his partner David Furnish. Evidently, reporting on this just wasn't enough for them, as they then proceeded to interview Stephen Green of the activist group Christian Voice, who said, "This isn't just a designer baby for Sir Elton John, this is a designer accessory." Mr. Green had previously voiced his support for Uganda's proposed law to make being gay punishable by death, saying, "The Bible calls for the ultimate penalty for sodomy," and suggesting that this is part of, quote, "Christian values and the traditional African way of life." After complaints were filed over Stephen Green's appearance during the story on Sir Elton John, the BBC issued a statement saying, "Our short news bulletin featured Elton John talking about wanting to have a child and an opposing viewpoint. All sides of the debate on surrogacy have been widely reported in the news media, and our coverage has reflected this." They later stated that, "It must be stressed that over time we have heard from all sides of this debate, dealing with the subject in a fair and impartial manner." How's that for an excuse? It's interesting to think of how they might have handled a story about a straight couple welcoming the birth of their first child. Would it really have been necessary to give time to a dissenting opinion about a couple having a baby? Is that the kind of occasion that calls for an opposing viewpoint on their newborn child in the name of fairness and impartiality? And yet, this is the reality of life for gay people. Even when we do something so simple as having a child, the very thing that people would fault us for not doing, suddenly there has to be another side to this. Like there's some kind of comparison to be made between starting a family and people treating our children as nothing but designer accessories. As if there's a legitimate debate to be had between our families and the people who think the government should execute us because of who we are. Do our lives always have to be balanced against the people who don't want us to exist? Because that's what it means to excuse this as being fair. That's what they're saying when they call this impartial. They're telling us these are just two different viewpoints to consider, a new family and their child, and some fool who thinks his God wants them dead. As if to say, well, that's a lovely story, now let's hear from someone who wants the happy couple hanged for their sins. Since when is bigotry something that deserves to be treated as a respectable response to our families and our lives? Why should that position be given a platform on the news? How can they even pretend that these people have any place in stories about our children? That's indefensible, and it shows a flagrant lack of respect for our equality and even our existence. I don't need my life balanced out by someone who wants me dead, and I certainly don't need the news acting like these are just two equally valid opinions. If balance is what they're really after, here's what they need to do. The next time a straight couple has their first child, I want to see the BBC interview someone who calls their baby a designer accessory. I want them to interview someone who thinks God wants heterosexuals killed and the government should be the one to do it. I want to see them balance straight people's lives against genocidal theocratic hatred. I want to see the news start treating their lives as something less than a given, as something up for debate, as something that should have an opposing viewpoint. As soon as they can bring themselves to do that, then they can say they're being fair, and not a moment sooner.